Hey everyone, welcome to another insightful episode of the Company Road podcast. I'm really thrilled to introduce our next guest today, Beth Hall, who's a transformative leader in the world of people and culture. And she's got over 15 years of experience shaping high-performing organizational cultures across a huge range and diverse industries. She's got a master's in organizational psychology from the University of London, brings a really rare blend of scientific rigor and real-world experience to her work in this area. And she's had pivotal roles, including the global head of organizational development at Cotton On Group here in Australia, and she led transformational initiatives across their global workforce. She's also been GM of standards and capability at the Australian HR Institute, where she established a national benchmark for HR standards and certification here in Australia. And Beth's got an approach which is grounded in a powerful belief that sustainable, inclusive cultures form the bedrock of business success. And her expertise in fostering agile, resilient environments has helped countless organizations and people thrive, particularly during times of uncertainty. So she's got a heap of qualifications, which include EQI 2.0, neuro-linguistic programming, like a bunch of cool stuff, which we can get into. And then for all you leaders and entrepreneurs listening out there, I hope you're as excited about this one as I am, because we're going to go into Beth's insights on creating thriving work environments where everyone can perform at their best, and aligning people's strategies with business goals, and navigating some of those complexities really around modern organizational life. So please join me in welcoming Beth Hall to the Company Road podcast. Beth, a huge welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Appreciate the intro.
Great. And Beth, your career spans a lot of things, but significant roles across different industries. Maybe we just start with an opening question around what drew you first to organizational psychology, or maybe as it was once called something else, I don't know. But how has your perspective on people and culture changed and evolved over your journey so far in your career?
Well, I've always been interested in people. I was a retailer back in the UK. So, as a retailer, it's a huge people business. And when I moved here to Australia, having grown up on Home and Away and Neighbours, I realised that I didn't necessarily want to be in retail in the sunniest months of the year. So, I decided to train retail. And as part of that, started to realize the impact capability and knowledge could have on performance, and really had a desire to use knowledge to empower performance, and went from there. Really picked up organizational development and well-being and performance, and got interested in why are people the way they are, and how when we put them in different environment change their behavior and how they show up. So wanted to not just look from an individual perspective, but it from a systemic cultural level. So
Yeah.
I did my master's in organizational psychology and then my undergrad because I was enjoying myself so much.
Yeah, awesome. All right. I guess it's definitely taking you on a journey in itself. And you've led a number of transformational initiatives at the Cotton On Group, for example, here, which is huge over here in Australia, across their global workforce as well. What do you think are some of the unique challenges that organizations are facing in implementing cultural change in diverse geographies, cultures, and how do you get around some of that, do you think?
Yeah, look, it's increasingly less about geography and more about the diversity and the makeup of people within workforces, whether that be multicultural, whether that be generational. There's lots of things that make us different. And I think we've got a lot better at embracing diversity and actually seeking out diversity. But with that comes challenge to, well, what is the norm around here? What do we believe is acceptable and unacceptable behavior? And when everybody has totally different lived experiences, totally different reference points for what that is, it has become a bigger focus for businesses to be able to articulate their values and their expectations and how it shows up. It's challenging when you look at a geographically dispersed business like Cotton On Group, and I've worked for other global businesses too, where you need to meet people where they're at. And in different countries, different workplaces, different types of workplaces, whether it be white collar, blue collar, there's a different expectation around what the team members expect from the business, just as much as what the business expects for them. So it's a really about looking at it from a contextual point of view. It's not a one size fits all, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a good answer. I think there's lots of interesting things about the ways in which businesses and leaders within businesses behave. But do you feel like there's a standard now, or do you feel like people are just trying to figure things out still. Where do you think we're at?
I always look at what's going on in the USA in order to inform what's going to come down the line. I've just appointed Trump. I think cases of incivility are on the rise. And it's interesting, we talk about burnout a lot in workplaces, but there's some really interesting research that's been done by Michael Leiter that shows that research into burnout is that incivility has a larger impact on burnout than workload. Yet we often talk about workload and the impact that's having on people not being able to get things done, but actually it's incivility that's impacting well-being. And it's tricky when you think about incivility because it's those everyday behaviors that people are exposed to that impact them. And what is incivility? Because what's incivility to me may not be what's incivility for you, Chris. I was talking to a team member just earlier today, and I was just doing check-ins with people across the business, and they were extremely vocal, like, this is toxic, like, it's just toxic.
Yeah.
Like, talk to me about what that means. We're using the word toxic a lot. What is toxic about it? What is happening? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What is making you label it that way? And I didn't actually align with his interpretation of what is toxic. Now, my role is not to choose to align or not to align, but to seek to understand. But it's a good demonstration of the fact that what some people see as acceptable behavior, others people don't, which is why companies really need to look at how do we define this for the collective so that culturally we're intentional about what we're trying to do here.
I mean, just from a history point of view, when did all of this start? Because I picked up on things in my own career, but when did organizations start doing this and when did it become as needed? And obviously it's needed now, as you're describing, but what have been the developments in your working life or maybe from your previous knowledge, do you think?
I think there's been some really cool startups approach to the way they run their businesses and the way they treat their people that has hit the headlines over the years. I think one of the notable ones is Netflix when they pushed out their PowerPoint, which was a really clear message to everybody wanting to work at Netflix or within Netflix of this is the way we roll, this is who we are. And I think that got people thinking about, yeah, how do we unashamedly explain who we are so that as part of the recruitment process, people are choosing to opt in or opt out of that culture. And I think values have been around for a while, and those values have been used to inform behaviors and to inform code of conducts that have been produced. But this larger discourse around culture has really come about due to the workforce and the employee also demanding more from the employer. So, as well as this kind of startup businesses that are thinking differently and creating great workplaces that are challenging the larger organizations, there's also this employee that's choosing what cultures they want to be part of and what they don't. And the younger generations just will not tolerate what their previous generations have, and they will demand social impact and they will demand certain ways of conduct and behavior. I'm a true believer that legislation comes about because someone did something wrong. And the amount of industrial relations legislation that we have faced within Australia alone, let alone globally, the latest being around psychosocial health and the expectation to provide an environment that is not only psychologically safe, but also has reduced all of the hazards that actually, in large part, are part of working life. So that's also kind of put notice on employers to take this stuff seriously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's almost evolved. It feels there's a lot. Expectation was down here, then it went the next level, and now we're talking psychosocial health and policies around that. But it feels like there's quite a lot more to consider, and there's more intricacy around that, and it's not maybe as easy or as uniform as it once was.
Oh, it's so heavily nuanced. As I say, what's acceptable to you versus what's acceptable to me. What are we in a multi-generational, multicultural society accepting or not accepting from our workplaces, our peers, our leaders, our companies? And the more and more focus we put on directors' liability to, the more impact it has on that top-down decision making and that systemic level structuring of businesses. It's becoming tricky to navigate. It's a very important conversation, but it's also very tricky to build cultures, because often when you're a startup business, you're largely the business is based on your family values and the founders and what they believe and who they are. And then as you start to scale up, the founders get further and further away from those team members, and therefore it's, Chinese whispers to determine what was the origin of this original thinking and way of being. And then you start with the subcultures that show up, whereby who is the leader of all of these different groups, and how are those subcultures feeding into the larger culture. And I think there's been a tendency in the past to, it'll be okay, let's focus on the growth, let's focus on the bottom line, let's focus on the commercial side of businesses. But the reality is businesses don't grow themselves, people grow businesses.
Mm.
And as you grow, the people problems grow if you don't have really clear foundations in place to be able to. I often talk to people about culture is deliberate effort. It's like any relationship, it's deliberate effort. You've got to invest in it, you've got to spend time thinking about it, you've got to spend time making sure that you are holding people accountable to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, deliberate effort and frameworks and policies and all of the foundations, all of the structure that you've been describing does sit in a company usually. But a lot of people might think that culture is really organic and you'd put the same people into any kind of room, just an empty hall or a warehouse or whatever, wherever the company is starting or needing to work. But you could put those people in and then they would assume that the culture would be there, defined, ready to go, and that things would just happen because people would just gravitate to what they thought they would be doing. And then you go from there. But obviously, in a more controlled environment, which now it needs to be, you have to set up all these different things. So has that always been the case? Do you feel like culture is organic, or do you feel can it be handmade? Can it be fine-tuned? What are some of the influences that we can have on culture, do you believe?
I believe that everyone is a CEO of culture.
Yeah.
Every interaction is either a deposit or a withdrawal from culture. You can have the most amazing culture within a team, and you can put someone in there that doesn't do the right thing and doesn't treat people in the right way. And if they're in a leadership position, the shadow they leave is even bigger. So culture is organic, it's alive, it's happening every day, it's ever changing, it's ever evolving. So I would say, whilst it's great to have a code of conduct and values and policies and frameworks to be able to set expectation with workforces on what it is that we do, the reality is that if that's not what's actually happening, then it's just something that someone wrote down once upon a time, because people will respond to other people's behavior more so than respond to a piece of paper they were given as part of their onboarding and induction. And yes, they signed it. Well done, you got a signature from someone, but that does not necessarily make up what's happening out there in the business day to day. I'm a big believer that the behavior you walk past is the behavior you accept. And if we're not calling out behaviors that don't align with that conduct, that values those policies, then essentially we're allowing that to happen within our businesses.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of your own radar as an employee in a team somewhere, like you should be as aware of it and going into each day at work, it sounds like with your eyes wide open and trying to receive the signals, understanding whether it's right for you. But do you feel like, from an individual's point of view, on the show, we have a lot of entrepreneurs listening. Do you feel like that there's something that an individual can do to influence? What can they bring to the culture in a way that would affect it personally or positively, I should say?
Yeah, look, I think again, everybody's behavior needs to be a conscious decision that you make. I think it's important for people to remember that intention and doesn't always equal behavior. So whilst they might have the best intent and the purest intent, the way
Yeah.
their behaviors actually show up to others may or may not be aligned with that intent. So there's a huge focus in schools at the moment around emotional intelligence, because I don't know about you, Chris, but I wasn't taught any emotional intelligence in school. So they've skipped our generations and they've realized that it needs to be part of the curriculum, because as technology grows, as we automate so many of our ways of doing things and our processes within organizations, our competitive advantage really does come down to that human element. And if we're giving so much to AI to be able to solve for, what is that critical thinking that we're bringing as humans, but also what is that behavioral aspect that we're bringing as humans to be able to lead differently, interact differently, and be able to build cultures that we're proud of. So, individuals have a huge impact on culture. I would say that if an individual was in a business where they felt the culture was not aligned with their values, I don't use the term cultural fit. I think that's against diversity and inclusion. I talk about cultural add. We move from cultural fit to cultural alignment, but I actually think it's about cultural add. What are you bringing to that culture? And if your cultural add is actually negatively impacting people and is causing some of those toxic behaviors. I just shared an example with you that someone felt they were adding earlier, then that's not a great place for anybody to be. So I'd be asking that person to just check themselves, but also check, are they changing based on that environment in which they're operating in?
It sounds like it would be really hard to manage. Now that you explain it like that, it feels like if there was a situation and a manager had to talk to their team member about that, or if a team member felt misaligned, or if something had happened, do you feel like these conversations are happening? Is it becoming easier, do you think?
It's a real mix. It is a real mix. For some organizations, they are great at a feedback culture and
Mm.
really creating that transparent, open dialogue in order to be able to essentially sense check behaviors and go, hey, something just happened in that meeting. Like, what was going on for you? And okay, I didn't think that that was okay, and this is why I didn't think that was okay. And was that your intent, or do you see how that was perceived? Like, actually having those meaningful conversations is really tricky if you're moving from meeting to meeting to meeting, and especially if you're doing that via the screen. So there are some things that we're up against here in terms of being able to create those open, transparent conversations. Some organizations are really great at it, others not so much. I was working with a small business out here in Geelong and supporting them with having some difficult conversations with their team members. And they text me saying, "Oh, your entire business should be how to have difficult conversations." Like, they actually were difficult because you coached us on how to do it in a humanistic way. And you can have great, transparent, open conversations with empathy. It's not a case of choosing one or the other. You can really help people understand how they're showing up, and actually it becomes an opportunity to support them in their own growth. So I would say it's mixed, is the short answer as to whether people are really embracing and leaning into these conversations or not.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. No, good answer. I think yeah, you're asking about whether I was taught emotional intelligence. And I remember a very distinct moment in my career where I was waiting on a promotion, waiting. This was in a marketing agency in London. And there was like, you got all the hard skills all fine. You got to work on the soft skills, right? And you got to work on your leadership style. And they actually threw me the Daniel Goleman book and said, you got to
Mhm.
read that. And they're like, this is now the thing. You need to understand your people. And I read it, and yeah, eventually I did get the promotion, but it was like a big missing piece in my jigsaw that I
Yeah.
needed to address quite urgently. And yeah, it was quite surprising to me that I had to do it at the time. But then when I got my head around it, it was like, yeah, this is really important. So
Yeah, yeah. And it's a skill that you can grow because it's not like your IQ that's set from the age of 17 onwards. Like, EQ is an ever evolving skill, and we actually pick it up naturally through lived experience as we grow. So,
yeah, yeah.
if you look back of, oh, I can't believe that I said that, but I would never say that now. I'd never do that now because based on your lived experience and your frame of reference, our brain's constantly evolving. When I became a parent, I read an amazing book on how to raise emotionally intelligent children. And
Yeah.
I totally changed the way I approach the world based on, oh, wow, like, actually validation is important before anything else. And how do we validate, even if we disagree? It's okay to disagree, but how do we validate that person still has a voice and it's heard and we're acknowledging them? And now, you brought up marketing agencies, not me. I was working with a marketing leader and their team, and the way the team were being treated on a daily basis was it just not kind. It was not kind. It was not good. I was observing team members joining the business with so much enthusiasm and rigor and excitement about what the business stood for and what they were trying to achieve. And I would watch day by day by day that become depleted and depleted. And the response from the leader was, "Hey, I am from marketing agency world. This is the way we speak to people. This is the way we treat people." And I was just like, wow, you are justifying your behavior to yourself based on the way you used to be treated.
Yeah.
And therefore, you believe because that's the way you were treated, that's therefore the way you should treat others, which in itself is a dangerous point of reference.
Yeah, I feel like some cultures are particularly hard on people, and you're faced with that kind of criticism the whole time. I think it's drummed into you that the critique is sort of healthy for you in that you take it on board, you learn from it, you move on, and 99% of the time you're going to be doing the wrong thing, and that 1% of the time you might be doing the right thing. So some cultures are a bit like that, and
Mm.
yeah, I can totally relate to that. It's a really hard one to navigate, particularly as you're coming through your career, you're going through the ranks, and who you fall to in terms of leadership and who's there to guide you is really important. It's really hard to choose sometimes. It's not something that you can be that outspoken about either, it feels like.
Yeah, look, it's tricky because you want to keep your job. So it's tricky to be able to find your voice in those environments where you're not psychologically safe and where there's a power dynamic there. Yeah. So
Mm.
the power dynamic is not in your favor. I think the people leave managers, not companies, has been spoke about for a while.
Yeah.
And whilst I agree with that, the latest research is finding that people are leaving leaders, not managers. So they're actually finding the decision making at the top, the strategic direction of the business, and the acceptable cultural decisions that are being made. They're actually saying, I understand why my middle manager is behaving the way they're behaving because of all of the cognitive load and pressure and impact that's being put on them. And I'm actually now not holding them accountable to it. I'm holding the leadership team accountable to it. So I think people are getting smarter about what's going on. As we grow our emotional intelligence as a human race, we're starting to see things that we maybe used to walk past or maybe used to accept, but now we're not accepting it and we're finding our voice. So, yeah, it's tricky. My advice to people in those situations is life is too short not to be happy. Make what is the right decision for you and what is best for you and your own mental health and well being. And if that environment is not serving you and it's not supporting you in your growth, then no job is worth being treated that way. So I have left businesses for that reason throughout my career. And there have been scary moments where am I going to be able to cover the mortgages? Am I going to be able to cover the school fees? What do I need to do to be able to not be here? But
Yeah.
sometimes happiness and well-being is worth more, hey?
Yeah, it's a really interesting. And there's this kind of notion that a company is not a forever place anymore. And it feels like there's the sustainable business and the inclusive cultures that you work on yourselves. It feels like there's always going to be a tension between that side of things and like no matter what the company does, no matter what the leadership situation is, the cultural initiatives, all of that, it can be the perfect thing. But at the same time, there's this kind of speed of, I don't know, attrition, speed of unsettledness, whatever it is. It feels like people are wanting just to try, get out and try a lot of stuff, right? So, how do you get over the kind of the tension between employee engagement and companies doing whatever they can just to kind of keep people, and then to what you're describing, people just want to get up and go sometimes?
Yeah, look, I think if you've got a great culture, you get boomerangs.
Yeah.
So if people need to move because that's right for their career trajectory and you're in a growth business that doesn't have the role for them right now, having a great culture that you're building around them means that they might go and get skills from other businesses and bring them back to yours. And actually, it's in a long term play, it's actually better for the business for them to leave and come back. And we see that boomeranging happening a lot with people going, oh, wow, I didn't realize how well I had it back there with that culture.
Yeah.
I've now gone out in the big wide world and worked at these different businesses and take me back.
Yeah.
That's my
Yeah. Yeah.
preferred space. I think treating people well and them leaving is better than not treating them well and not investing in culture and them staying because you're actually just stagnant as an organization too. So there is a direct correlation between culture and strategy, and Denison has done a lot of work on how to bring those two constructs together to understand what is the impact of culture on strategy. And it's shown us that it's a worthwhile investment and there are returns to be made from a commercial perspective if we invest in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting that you mentioned culture and strategy. I thought you were going to mention the breakfast word as well, because that comes up sometimes.
Look, the line's there for a reason, and it is
Yeah.
a bit cliche, but you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have, like I said, people grow businesses, not strategy. So if you don't have the right people behaving in the right way, then it won't be a sustainable strategy in the long run.
Yeah, interesting. So I do a lot of work in experience design space and often employee experience and customer experience. Some of those worlds come together sometimes within organizations that I work with, but it's often interesting to see that no matter what you do and you put down on paper, what happens as a result around the organization can be totally different, right? So you can
Hmm.
experience design for key moments in the onboarding journey and when people are being recruited and when they join up, and you hope that you can do all these things to obviously make them stay for 5 or 10 years and have the most amazing career. But actually, you can't design, it's a bit like Jurassic Park. You can't design for all those conditions ad infinitum. You have to just allow for some flex. So where do you feel like the most impactful initiatives would be focused to get a culture humming along? And where do you think some things will just be maybe a bit of a waste of time?
I hate the word initiative. I think, and look, a lot of consultants use the word initiative or project, but
Yeah,
culture just isn't that. And if
yeah,
you
yeah,
think that you can pop an initiative in and all is well, and we did it a lot with well-being, yeah, we
yeah,
just said, oh, let's offer them yoga, let's offer them fruit, let's offer them this. But the reality is that if we're not solving for the root cause of that well-being issue, then we're just putting band-aids on it. So that would be my similar response with culture. So it's interesting that you mentioned the kind of people experience. I'm working with a client at the moment where we're mapping out their entire people experience at the moments that matter, and we're
yeah, yeah,
doing
yeah,
an immersive experience with all parts of their organization, whereby they're coming in and they're talking to us about what's going on in their culture. So what happened during attraction, onboarding, induction, what's happening from a performance, well-being,
yeah,
development perspective, and really capturing their lived experiences as well as their aspirational desires for the business, to then determine, okay, where are the areas that matter the most. It does differ per business, per organization, because of the makeup of their organization as well. It would be remiss of me not to call out onboarding. It's that whole primary recency theory around what was the initial expectation? What was the first thing that I learned about this culture? Because that kind of becomes the benchmark that everything is observed against. So that
mm,
would certainly be a moment that I would suggest people lean in and focus on.
yeah,
Well-being and development are the two things that are actually, in many cases, engaging employees to leave organizations over salary. Now, that's not to suggest, particularly with our cost of living in Australia right now, that's not to suggest that remuneration isn't important. It certainly is. But the generations in the workforce are so focused on well-being, whether that be flexibility, whether that be hybrid ways of working, whether that be cognitive loads. People are really realizing that life is short, and they want to make sure that they're doing engaging, challenging work, but they're also getting the other joys in their life. And development, people are looking for, how are you supporting my career? So to your point, Chris, they might move, but how are you supporting me to pick up different skills and pieces of knowledge and exposing me to different things? And that's where the startup world is winning, because they're allowing people to wear multiple hats, to try out lots of different skill bases, to be able to really shape and inform their career. We zigzag now, we don't go up corporate ladders. So being able to offer development experiences is becoming more and more important, and more important to the culture. So you mentioned earlier the feedback of, it's not right, it's not right, it's not right, and you might once in a while get something that you get right. That creates a culture that is risk adverse. That creates a culture where people are so scared to color outside the lines in case, once again, the feedback comes to as negative. So that developmental, that regular, you have a go, I'll back you no matter how it turns out, is what again helps businesses grow in a world that is so ever changing. We're experiencing, the change we're experiencing today is the most amount of change we've ever experienced. But guess what? Tomorrow we're going to experience even more. So
yeah.
that adaptive nature of organizations only comes from great culture where people are psychologically safe, they're able to take risks and know that they're supported.
Yeah, I like the analogy that you were just using, which was around the color and always the lines of demarcation around culture, because sometimes I don't think everyone would think of it this way, but sometimes it feels really rigid and it's almost prescribed, but it feels like it's been a certain way for a while and you wouldn't have the breathing space within certain areas to do what you felt was right in all cases. So you would be towing the line a little bit. But just talking from an entrepreneur's point of view, it's like kind of coloring in books or whatever. So there are lines in which you're expected to color inside, but if you venture over, it's going to look like a mess. So some cultures might look a little bit like that, whereas others would be much more forgiving, tolerance and risk. They'd be happy for you to push into other areas, and some cultures might just be a total blank piece of paper. Do you use any kind of metaphors or visual, representations of how culture works? And is there anything like that that you want to mention?
Well, culture is a petri dish, so it's
Petri dish, yeah.
constantly yeah, it's constantly alive and moving, and
Yeah.
you don't really know what organisms are growing in there, to be honest, half the time. So whenever I start working with a business, I start with a cultural diagnostic. I start to understand what exactly is showing up, what are the patterns, what are the behaviors. So within that frame of reference, those patterns, behaviors, rituals, that's really what's going on, and understanding and stepping back from those to look at it from a systemic lens and from a, okay, so what is actually playing out here? Is it the actors? Is it the environment? Is it the ways of working? And sometimes it can be, oh, it's actually the operating rhythm we need to solve for. If we solve for the operating rhythm, it's actually not a people issue, it's a process and way of working issue. Other times it's, no, we have a people issue here, and we can actually pinpoint why that behavior has become acceptable and who has made that behavior become acceptable. And we can have those tough conversations to say, do you know the impact that you're having? Do you know that when you're behaving in this way, this is the result? And we have to hold up the mirror to leaders again to have that honest conversation with themselves around that executive table. Jim Collins talks about freedom within the framework. That's another way to view it, of what is the framework of this culture. We don't want everybody to act and be the same, because then we're not embracing DE and I. So it's getting that balance. It's important.
Yeah, it's a fine balance, isn't it, between obviously everyone thinking and acting the same way because that's what's being observed versus other sidesteps and ventures, pivots, or whatever the word is you want to use. We don't like the word pivot anymore since lockdown or whatever it was. It's been ditched. But yeah, I mean, it's that kind of thing. You have to design in some freedom, right, for that self-expression to be made possible.
Oh, for sure. Otherwise, people don't belong.
Yeah.
If we want to create places where people belong, then we need to embrace who they are. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to put up with the brilliant jerk that's delivering results but is treating everybody really badly. But it's about, how do we be accepting of others and self, and how do we seek to understand why is someone behaving in a certain way, and what are we doing at an organizational level to either reward that behavior or encourage that behavior, which is what psychosocial health legislation is all about. In essence, it's about saying, well, what is going on environmentally for these individuals that we're bringing into our environment, and what's our role as leaders to be able to look at that in a strategic way, to be able to determine, what have we built here and how are we okay with that? And sometimes, again, I say that culture is deliberate effort, because if we don't prioritize it, and if we don't see it as a part of our business that we need to work on, the same way we need to work on our balance sheet, the same way that we need to work on our product designs, we can design culture the same way that we can design product, if we give it deliberate effort and the priority it needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always hard, isn't it, in justifying. And I've worked with organizations that have been in this boat, as have you. It feels like you'd have to justify that next to the spend or the effort that would be associated with other things that are, driving the sales, the revenue, the this, the that, constantly within an organizational environment, competing against some of those pressures. So, from an entrepreneur's point of view, and again, if you're a leader in one of these organizations, how best do you think it, what is the strongest case you can put forward for investing this time and resource into culture, do you believe?
Performance. If you want a high performing organization, you need a high performing team. How do you get a high performing team? You work on your culture. Because you can have high performing people, but if you don't have a high performing team, you don't have a high performing culture.
Yeah.
So you can have all of the right hiring practices and you can get people with all of the right experience, knowledge, and qualifications. But if they're not going to play nice in the sandpit, if they're not going to leverage the collective intelligence of the workforce, then you are not going to be as high performing as an organization as you could be. You've hired for potential and you've put them in an environment that doesn't enable that potential to deliver results. So for me, to be honest with you, Chris, it's just not a hard sell at all, because do you want a high performing organization? If you do, culture makes the list.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's not and I think a lot of C-suite realize that, they clock it. Some of them know what to do about it. Some of them just go, I don't know what to do, let's get a consultant in. And it's like, it's you, you know, you can get a specialist to help inform, but there's got to be a catalyst for change or a willingness to change in order to be able to make a difference.
Yeah, 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 really good. I mean, I think that you mentioned startup culture a little bit just before, and that obviously goes at a certain speed, and you can have the best product, the best proposition, the best brand, all of that is fine. But to your point around performance, the differentiator would come from how well that engine and that operating model, that organizational structure was actually running in the background, because if it wasn't, then you might just have an empty ship, basically.
Yeah.
You'd have all the amazing promises and the amazing products, but if you can't sustain that, then to your other point around sustainable business, you can't do that, right? It won't grow.
Yeah. Oh, and when I started my business, I called it Culture Edge for a reason.
Yeah,
Like, the edge is the competitive edge. A large part of the companies I work for are startup growth, scale up organizations.
yeah,
And I'll go in as a HR practitioner, or I'll go in as a fractional HR or support person that's being brought in to solve for development or culture or structure or whatever it may be. And when I get to the team member sentiment to understand how they're feeling and what's going on, whenever I start to hear in that startup environment people saying, things aren't clear, everything keeps on changing, like, I'm just not feeling like I'm at successful because we're constantly chasing too many rabbits and not catching any, I say, okay, let's talk about startup environments and cultures. That they're not for everyone, and that's okay, they're not for everyone, but let's just talk about and be really honest about who we are and how we operate. Because
Mm.
as a startup, in order to perform, in order to be successful, you need to test and respond. You need to pivot quickly. I'm losing the pivot word. Like, you need to try different things and be okay with change. And sometimes you circle back and retry the same thing that you did a few months or years earlier because the timing wasn't right then, but it is now.
Mm.
That's not for everyone. You need a team that is so adaptable, and adaptability is a skill. Do they have it? Let's test for it before we hire them to make sure that we're not creating an environment and a culture where people are unhappy, because what happens is they're the ones that start to bring in the toxicity, because they're bemoaning the change, they're complaining, they're bringing the vibe down. Your vibe is your tribe. If you've got someone coming to work every day unhappy and not being able to navigate the environment, then maybe startup's not for you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I don't think, without working at a few different companies and finding your feet, it's a really hard thing to judge, almost, because sometimes you don't know enough about an organization before you walk in. You're starting in a role, you're getting to learn things over a period of time. Then there's change up happening around you. There might be a restructure, new leadership, new manager, whatever it is. All of these things can change around you. So adaptability is very important. And yeah, it just feels like, unless you've got like the most acute self-awareness around what environments you thrive in and thrive less in, it's hard to do it without a bit of a trial and error. But do you feel like there are any other ways in which we can understand which cultures would be most suitable for us?
Yes, there is a test for it. You can
Good.
do a psychometric that tells you exactly where you thrive. What are your energy givers? What are your energy takers? And they can really become your kind of shopping list when it comes to selecting the right company. So, as much as you are going through an interview and a selection process from the company's perspective, you should also be interviewing that company too. So you should be asking during that process, talk to me about your culture. If I asked your team how they would describe working there, what would they say? And when it gets to reference check, they're checking your references with previous employers. Ask them for access to their employees, to ask their employees some questions. Just watch out for those employees that think it's toxic, but actually they're just in the wrong place and there's nothing environmentally untoward. It's just not for them. So,
Yeah.
again, it's about having those honest conversations with yourself to go, when was I at my best? Like, they call it in flow. Like, when was I in flow? When was I really in a great place? What
Yeah.
was happening around me? Who was I working with? What work was I doing? Was it planned? Was it unplanned? Was it clear or unclear? Like, actually have that conversation with yourself, because you can be the best performing team member in one culture and the worst performing team member in another culture. And I see it sometimes where people go, I don't understand. I'm not set up for success. And I was great at my last company. I was the top performer and now I'm not. And I'm like, but your environment changed.
Mm.
So is it the right one for you? Or is it that there's just bigger and better players here?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do you know the test that you're describing? Is that one you can share?
Yeah, Savile Wave. It's a 20-minute online test that you do that then tells you this is your environment. This is
That's
your environment.
right.
The yeses and your environment knows. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, pop a link in. Thanks for that. That's the good one. Yeah, because I think you don't know otherwise. I mean, you can just kind of somebody might say it's a great place to work, but it's their point of view and their own experience, and then you end up in
Yeah.
the wrong place. So it's a big decision moving, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. And yeah, what else? I mean, it feels like the other interesting thing is about psychological. I mean, you mentioned the psychosocial training and the understanding of psychology within organizations, because aside from emotional intelligence, which feels like it's more broadly understood now, but no, from a psychology point of view, to be able to lead well, to be able to manage well and thrive in some of these environments, it feels like you do need to be, more clued up on that side of things. So is that something that you're seeing is being developed more? Like, what are the trends happening in that space?
Yeah, I'm getting more and more requests for leadership development.
Mm.
The I find, like anything, there's waves. So we're currently riding the wave of let's go back to 360s. Let's go back to making sure that people know what their manager, their peers, and their direct reports think of them.
Yeah.
I had one company that asked me to do their entire workforce. There was 30 people in the workforce, do the entire workforce 360s. And I said, because you want everybody to not get along? Why would we do this? Why would we be in such a small office environment and everybody go through a 360 process? It's not for everybody. It's a great tool to be used for leaders that have reached the point in their careers, or entrepreneurs that have reached the point in their careers whereby that self-awareness, there's only so much that they know about themselves or can read about themselves, and they actually need some more data, and that really helps uncover those blind spots. So yeah, the 360s are making a comeback. Mentorship is making a comeback too, in terms of it's really hard to be able to create a culture without role models,
Mm.
without people that you are looking to in terms, and there needs to be a diversity of role models available, of course, and a diversity of leadership, which is why we're really focusing on diversity of leadership. There's not one way to lead. There's not one background or experience that you need to have in order to be in that executive team. And we want that diversity of role models and that diversity of mentors to help support people see what good looks like from a behavioral perspective. So, whilst EQ can certainly be taught and it is a very effective skill that can be learnt, culture again comes back to how's everyone showing up?
Mm.
How, what's going on in this environment, what is rewarded and what is challenged. And whatever is rewarded becomes the norm, becomes the currency. So environmentally, we need to solve for that rather than just putting it all on our leaders.
Yeah, I mean, people vote with their feet, right? It feels like
Mm.
you can only say and do so much, but people are going to be behaving in that environment in a way that they feel is appropriate to the situation. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, the hybrid working environment doesn't feel like it's been solved just yet. I don't know if you've got a point of view around that, but I know I've worked within businesses where it's basically you have to be at your desk and there's a piece of software that's basically tracking whether you're at your desk or not. And there's that kind of stuff happening.
Yeah.
People are trying to get around it by just going back upstairs every 40 minutes to shimmy the mouse a bit or whatever it is. But do you
Yeah.
feel like there's a solve for something like that where companies are trying to obviously encourage, and it's a bit to do with mentorship as well. They want to surround people by people that will be inspiring and that will help give them guidance in their careers and create that sense of togetherness. But do you feel like, is there an evolution for hybrid working, do you think?
I've worked for fully remote businesses, I've worked for hybrid, and
Yeah.
I've worked for fully in-person businesses.
Yeah.
I believe that everybody in the organization is and should be a cultural contributor. How you contribute culturally is deliberate effort, whether that be in the physical space or in the remote space. For
Yeah.
some businesses, geographically, it's actually not even possible. It's not just I've got to sit in traffic for an hour, it's I'm on a totally different time zone in a different country.
Yeah.
So my take on it all is this conversation is not going to go away until generations of decision makers retire, and then we'll stop talking about it, hopefully. But the reality is that there is a social macro thing at play here that sits outside of that organizational construct as well, in terms of our cities, our properties, our ways of living, not just about our ways of working. So I
Mm.
think employees are going to again focus on what is right for them and their lifestyle. And whilst some may be willing to sacrifice their lifestyle for the short term, if their life and needs change, they will vote with their feet, to your point, in terms of moving on.
Yeah.
It is a trust conversation too. How much trust is there? If you're still working in a business that is so focused on input and not output, that clock in, clock off. And there's employees that are testing. If I clock in, but just for an hour, will I still get the tick on the system
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say I went to the office? Oh, great. And and I've spoke to a team member that went from I did 8 hours one day, then I did 7, then I did 6, and they went all the way down to an hour and still got their tick to say they were in the
Oh, wow.
office. And they told all of their friends. They were going department by department to let them know that, an hour on the swipey works in our business. So employees will always find a way. So it's about trust, it's about open communication, it's about really sharing the why, and being quite deliberate again of what are we doing when we come together? Because if we're coming together to sit on a Teams call or a Slack channel for 8 hours and just happen to be sat next to somebody, then that's not necessarily building the right culture or sending the right message. So the ideal hybrid, and research has shown us that the ideal is hybrid. The social connection happens, and businesses are very deliberate about creating collaborative spaces to encourage and drive collaboration in the office. And then for the deep work that's focused, or indeed with clients, that is done remotely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Oh, that's good. That's good. Hey, we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to catch on like a few quick things. So, if you're a leader or an emerging leader within a business and or organization, from your experience, what are some of the signs of there being a problem, like, or something going wrong? What do you think people should be looking out for?
Behaviors, just
Yeah.
look for incivility, look for just small, seemingly insignificant hostility or gripes or frustrations that are happening across a team environment. And as a leader, step back and go, what's the pattern here? What's happening? Is this isolated? What is the cause of this? And try and look at it from a systemic lens. Try and be an outsider looking into your business as opposed to being an actor within it, to really be able to get to what the root cause is. When you look at your personal leave balances, are you finding that you have a huge leave liability and people aren't taking leave or putting it in the system? Do you find that a lot of people are taking leave and it happens to be on a Monday or a Friday? It's funny that. Why is leave happening on a Monday or Friday? Like, what's going on here? So look at your people data too. Your people data will tell you a lot. How many people are leaving within the first 6 months? That will tell you a lot. Was it not what they expected? Why was it not what they expected? What happened in that
Mm.
particular process? So look at your people data, be an observer of your environment, look at the behaviors and interactions that are happening to try and establish the themes.
Yeah, great, great. And then on the more positive side, I mean, what are good examples of a business thriving and some of the signals there, do you believe?
People being driven to drive the outcome, and that's not about how many hours they work or the late nights or weekends they put in, but being really outcome focused and driven towards the greater good. Civility, being good to others, being kind to others, not being quick to judge. Something goes wrong, having an autopsy without blame, as opposed to trying to cover myself in terms of, this wasn't me and let me prove why it was this person or that person.
Mm.
People helping each other out, covering for each other, people asking about the whole person, people asking, how was your weekend? Knowing their kids' names or their sporting team or whatever it may be is just creating an environment where people belong and where people care. So that level of inclusivity, always ask the way your newest team member is treated. If you ask the way your newest team member is treated and what words they would use to describe your culture, it's a really good eye opener as to what it is that they're walking into.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, really good. I mean, you mentioned how was your weekend question. I always wondered how to answer that because you can give away quite a lot of yourself, but some people just expect, yeah, it was good. The weather, sun was out and, whatever it is, we talk about the weather. But,
Mhm.
you can give in that moment because you're in the elevator or wherever you are, you can give quite a lot about yourself. So,
So
in a
much.
more transparent culture, if people are getting to know you, then you can use that as an opportunity to share a bit more about yourself. Happens every week,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, for sure. And my follow-up question when they say good is always, what did you do?
Yeah.
And it tells me so much about a person, and I do it with my clients too. I ask them about their weekend and what they did, and it's like, oh, okay, this is what's keeping them up at night. They had a staycation not because they necessarily wanted to, but because their mental load and cognitive load is so much that they're exhausted. Okay, how can I take some of that cognitive load off? And then that's where you start to show compassion and empathy across your business.
Yeah, brilliant. All right. And finally, what excites you most about the future of work, do you think? What's keeping you up at night because you're that excited?
I am just so excited about group dynamics. Like, I
Yeah.
just think as AI is starting to take a lot of the doing, we're so much more focused on team success than individual success. We're becoming so much more focused on what is the dynamic within a group. And this new generation that's coming through, they're not going to have the same start to their careers that we did, because they're almost going to come in at mid career, because all of the early career stuff is going to be automated. And how we create in a great environment at mid career when they haven't necessarily had all of that social construct and environment to kind of learn as they go in that early career, and how are we setting up our businesses for success to be able to embrace and support that. So I actually think AI is going to allow us to be more humanistic. It's going to free up our time to ask that second question about the weekend, because the cognitive load allows us to, because a lot of our heavy lifting is done. So I'm excited about people's behaviors and how stress is going to be going down and care is going to be going up.
Yeah, wonderful. Good to end on an optimistic note. Thank you so much. And yeah, Beth, I mean, you're incredibly qualified talking through this stuff. You can hear your passion. Obviously, you've got a lot of experience in helping out teams and organizations. And yeah, thank you for being so generous with your thoughts and points of view on the show today. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for your great questions, Chris. I
And
appreciate it.
before we go, like, how do people reach you if they want to get in touch or ask a question as well?
Or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love
Yeah.
to connect with you there. I'm often posting what's happening in the world of work. So come and see what I'm talking about, and leave comments on there. Otherwise, you can contact me through my website, which is www.cultureedge.com.au.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks so much. We'll leave it there.